Hi everyone, and welcome to the first in my series of totally lit videos, shifting a little bit from language focus and looking at literature. One of my students asked me to have a look at sonnets. Before we do that, just a quick note on literature. Whether or not you're doing a syllabus that combines language and literature, or if you might be perhaps doing something like I'm more familiar with the Cambridge system, where English literature is specifically a subject on its own. They might tell you that you can spell your own name wrong and you're not even going to get penalized because spelling and grammar is not really the focus of literature so much as analysis and that kind of thing. Try to keep your language in check. My advice would be don't neglect spelling. Make sure you've got a good vocabulary base because just having those skills in language makes it so much easier to express yourself clearly and effectively. Right, so let's have a look at sonnets. Okay, so what's a sonnet? Well, all I'm going to tell you is three things. Number one, it's a poem. Number two, it consists of 14 lines. And number three, and here's the one that we're obviously going to talk the most about, it contains iambic pentameter. The most important thing to remember about poetry is, well, consider your drama. I mean, how boring was it reading Macbeth or Romeo and Juliet off a script? Drama's designed to be watched. And in the same way, poetry is designed to be read and heard. And this issue of iambic pentameter, very often, it's very, very difficult to understand what it is from looking at it on a page. You need to hear it. If you happen to be a musical person and you're one of those amazing people that I just don't understand who can look at a sheet of music and hear the music in your head, then I guess the best way to indicate what iambic pentameter is in the form like this. Have a look at that. There's a whole bunch of dots and there's a whole bunch of dashes. Now I'll tell you, the dots are a little bit quieter, the dashes are a little bit louder. Now how much has that helped you so far? I think we still need to hear what it sounds like. So iambic pentameter is used in a lot of cases. If you just open up practically any page of Shakespeare, any play that he's written, any sonnet that he's written, and search, it doesn't take you long to find a perfect line of iambic pentameter. And what it sounds like is this. Or this. Or I guess if you're Donald Duck, 5 of them every single time, and that's where you get the word pentameter from. 5 iambics. My name is not an iambic. Smithy is just not iambic. But a word like believe, perceive, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, words where the accent falls on the second syllable. That's what we're looking for. Look at the sentence. My sister ate my favorite bag of chips. Now, if you would just say, well, my sister ate my favorite bag of chips, man. But look at where the accent lies. We never say sister. We say sister. My sister ate my favorite bag of chips. Ba-da, da-da, 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 da-da. And that's where we get it from Shakespeare. But soft what light through yonder window breaks. It is the east, and Juliet is the sun, and it goes on and on and on, these iambic pentameters endlessly in Shakespeare. Why? I guess it's easy on the ear. It's pleasant, and it's a rhythm that people enjoy. And these things have been around for over 700 years, so somehow they've had an impact. These breathtakingly good-looking chaps here on the page. First of all, let's look at Francesco Petrarca. Looks like somebody just ran over his cat, doesn't he? The guy on the left, over 700 years ago, he set the standard for what we now call the Petrarchan sonnet. 14 lines and a particular rhythm. On the right, we got old Shakespeare. I'm sure you've heard of him before. But take note that that's more than 250 years later when Shakespeare took Petrarch, who he actually mentions in some of his plays, and the Petrarchan sonnet structure, and decided to redesign it for himself. In between, plenty of poets have used combinations of both of these, but you will in literature need to know the rhyming combinations for each of them, so we're going to have a look at that now. Okay, here's a sonnet that was written by Petrarch himself, and you'll notice it's obviously all in Italian. Being Italian, he wrote in Italian. Let's make it a bit easier. There's your English translation. If you look at flowers, bowers, hours, and towers, those all rhyme, so we'd give them an A. Sets, amulets, violets, and let's give those a B. Stream, beam, and deem, mark that as C. And clear, dear, and near, we'll call those Ds. So there's your basic Petrarchan sonnet structure, the most common one. 2 ABBAs and 3 CDs. Now, if you're a visual person like me, I always picture Mamma Mia band ABBA going on tour to Italy. There's 2 of them, and they're their 3 CDs that they released. So I don't know if that helps you, but there's your basic structure for a Petrarchan sonnet. There are slight variations that we'll have a look at. So let's have a look at this Elizabeth Barrett Browning, How Do I Love Thee? This is entitled Sonnet number 43. Have a look at it. Doesn't it look exactly like something you've seen before? Before I give you the answers, why don't you pause for a second and see if you can figure out the rhyming scheme. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Okay, so as we move on then, what is the rhyming scheme? Well, if we look at ways, grace, days, praise, those are A's. Height, sight, light, right, all B's. Then we've got use, lose, and choose, all C's, and faith, breath, and death. Interesting, there's almost like a half rhyme there, which is something that you'll also look at in literature. But there's your basic structure, and as you can see, it is exactly the structure of a Petrarchan sonnet, which Barrett Browning used. Yeah. So there are slight variations. On the left-hand side is the sort of traditional one. But if you notice on the right-hand side, they would have listed is ABBA followed by CDDC. So lines 5 to 8 might not follow the exact same rhyming scheme as the first 4. Well, they kind of follow the same pattern, but the 5th line doesn't rhyme with the first, so to speak. Also a common last 6 lines, the last sestet, EF, 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 or CD, 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 or whatever you want to call it on the left. And then on the right we've got an EFG, EFG. This is also quite common. We would still associate this more with Petrarchan than Shakespearean sonnets. Just one final note then on terminology. A poem that's written without any gaps between the lines. Now remember, in writing we talk about paragraphs. In poetry we talk about stanzas. If it has no gaps, we generally call this a single entity. And a lot of Petrarchan sonnets appear in this fashion. Some of the terminology you might be expected to know. The first 8 lines and the last 6 lines, we would actually break these up. Because the rhyming scheme changes ever so slightly in the last 6, we kind of isolate those. Now remember, in poetry we don't talk about paragraphs, we talk about stanzas. And an 8-line stanza is known as an octave, 6 lines known as a sestet. So those are a couple of pieces of terminology that you should know. So the Petrarchan sonnet, you would say, consists of an octave followed by a sestet. Very often it's written as a single entity with no gaps, but from time to time it is broken up into those 2 components, and that's the terminology you would use there. A really useful exercise right now would be for you to pause this when I tell you to and have a look at the rhyming scheme. See if you can identify it, because this process will get you more in tune and comfortable with the Shakespearean sonnet form. So give it a pause now and see if you can figure that out. Hopefully you noticed that day and may rhyme with each other. Temperate and date. Well, Shakespeare loves his half rhymes, but those are supposed to rhyme. Shines, declines, dimmed and untrimmed. Fade and shade, oust and growest. See and thee. What was your rhyming structure? Well, here it is. If you got that all right, well done. We've got ABAB, CD, CD, EF, EF, and the last 2 G's at the end. We can often look at Shakespeare's sonnets as being able to be divided into four sections. So as you've noticed there, I've divided these ones into 4 groups. The first 3 consist of 4 lines each. Now a 4 lines within a poem is known as a quatrain. So what have we got here? The first 3 are 3 quatrains, and If anybody ever asks you what a sonnet is about, read the last two lines first. Very often that's a giveaway because it's kind of a conclusion or a wrap-up of thoughts. These last two lines that rhyme with each other are known as a rhyming couplet. Okay, so this final one, just as a bit of a challenge here. Literary teachers and literary people just love to throw you in the deep end. Have a look at Robert Frost's poem here, Acquainted with the Night. And yes, we can call it a sonnet. It consists of 14 lines. But man, if you look at the rhyming structure, something just doesn't seem to make sense. The first 4 lines are very, very similar to a Shakespearean sonnet. So, and the last 2, in fact, also with the rhyming couplet there. But somewhere in between there, he's gone off on his own tangent. Now, noticing that and recognizing that and being able to discuss that, you could describe the poet as unique. You could describe the poet as setting his own rules for the, using portions of Shakespearean sonnets and bits and pieces or evidence of Petrarchan influence here and there. So literature is not always as simple as ABBB or ABBA or ABCD. So there's quite a lot you can look at in this, and this is why we very often study Robert Frost at slightly higher levels. But if you've got the basics of what the traditional Petrarchan sonnet should look like, what the traditional Shakespearean sonnet should look like, you should be able to recognize those elements. And I would say you're well on the way towards analyzing the rhythm, the rhyme, and the basic structure of these very useful and very popular poems. So I hope that was really helpful as your basic introduction to sonnets and the first of my totally lit videos. Please feel free to leave me a comment and let me know what else you'd like me to cover. In the meantime, take care and cheers.